Hey guys, Mr. Wilhelm here. Today I'm here to discuss with you heredity and genetics. There are quite a few new terms that are associated with heredity and genetics. A bunch of new crazy sounding words such as heterozygous and homozygous and phenotype and genotype. We need to identify the definitions of these various terms and figure out how all of these terms and what they mean and what they represent, how they fit together. So we're going to start talking about these terms. First one, heredity. Heredity is the study of the passing on of traits from parents to kids or from parents to offspring. We've been discussing heredity already and its definition. Heredity is learning how and why physical and behavioral characteristics are passed on from parents to offspring. Traits. Traits are a person's behavioral and physical characteristics. Examples, traits can be brown hair, blue eyes. Can also be behavioral characteristics such as your personality. Your brown hair or your hair color is inherited from your parents. It's a trait that you got from your parents. Your eye color is a trait that you received from your parents, as well as your personality. If you're fairly quiet and keep to yourself, then you probably got that behavioral characteristic, that behavioral trait from your parents. If you're outgoing and like to talk a lot, more than likely, that came from your parents as well. Now, traits obviously do come from your parents, but may not necessarily be apparent or visible in your parents. So maybe you have blonde hair, but both your mom and dad have brown hair. Uh, they still carry that trait, even though it's not visible. And we'll discuss how you can receive those traits, even though they may not be visible in your parents. Genes. A gene is a specific trait. Okay. An example, hair color is a trait, whereas a gene is the specific color, such as brown. Okay, so we got a couple other examples here. Hair color, that's a trait. Brown is a gene. Blonde is a gene. Red is the gene. Those are all genes for the hair color trait. Okay, traits. Height. Okay, the gene would be either tall or the gene would be short. And that is the gene for height, the height trait. And then personality, outgoing or quiet. Okay, so all of these specifics over here on the right, okay, brown hair, blonde hair, red hair, those are all genes for the hair color trait. Okay, so genes are specific. Genes are specific for traits. Offspring. We've already identified this word a couple different times using our word wall. Offspring is a child in relation to its parents. Okay. I am offspring to my parents. You are offspring to your parents. The puppies here are offspring to the mom dog. Okay. We are all offspring to our parents. Okay. Even our parents are offspring to their parents. So offspring are the traits that are passed on to the the child or the kids in this example. All right, here's one of those crazy words, phenotype. Phenotype is a person's physical characteristics. Okay, so this is what we see, physical characteristics. In this example, green eyes, that is called a phenotype. Okay, having dimples, that is a phenotype. Brown hair is a phenotype. Okay, so that is a person's physical characteristics. It's what I can see with my eyes. I can see it. Okay, that is called phenotype. Now, in contrast, we have this word that's called genotype. Now, genotype is the code that we use to represent that physical characteristics. Okay, such as the green eyes. Now, green eyes is the phenotype. Okay, the letters that we would represent those green eyes is capital G, lowercase g. Okay, so when we start trying to identify how traits are passed on, we have to use this code, this code words or these code language in order to identify how they're passed on. Now, you really don't have a capital G and lowercase g floating around in your body. Okay, you have this DNA that does not have letters, but we, in the science of heredity, use letters to represent those characteristics. Okay, and we will continue to clarify this as we go along. So if I'm going back, let's look at this again. Okay, the eye color, okay, that is phenotype. The letters that represent the eye color is genotype. Okay, genotype, phenotype. Now, these two things are the same. Okay, this is green and this is green. Okay, but when it's a physical characteristic that we can see, we call that the phenotype. And when it's letters that represent that eye color, it is genotype. All right, allele. Now, to make this even a little bit more confusing, allele is the different forms of a trait, okay, that a person might have. Now, this is going to get really important when we start looking at Punnett squares here pretty soon, and we start identifying how traits are passed on and how you might get that blonde hair even though your parents have the brown hair, okay? So an allele is the specific trait. So here we're looking at the genotype for eye color, okay? This is one allele, and then this is the other allele, okay? So one capital G is one allele, the other capital G is the other allele. You get one of these alleles from your mom, you get the other allele from your dad, okay? Now, this will continue to make more sense as we continue to move forward. Now, a trait can either be dominant or it can be recessive. If a trait is dominant, it's usually what we see, okay? It's usually what we see as an outward appearance, okay? It's a trait that covers up another trait. So we have dominant traits and we have recessive traits. Recessive traits are the traits that get covered up. Now, dominant traits, we use the genotype. Okay, we use a capital A or a capital letter, doesn't necessarily have to be A, just a capital letter to represent a dominant trait, okay, a dominant allele. And then we use a lowercase letter to represent a recessive trait, a recessive allele. So capital letters are used to represent dominant alleles, dominant traits. Lowercase letters are used to represent recessive alleles, recessive traits. Okay, now, when we're looking at the genotype, we're looking at the genetic code. We can have two alleles that are the same. If two alleles, two parts of the genetic code are the same, they're either both dominant or they're both recessive, we call this homozygous. Okay, homozygous, homozygous. Okay, so if I have two capitals, that's homozygous dominant. Two lowercase, okay, that is homozygous recessive. So here is an example of a Punnett square. We're going to work with Punnett squares next week. In this Punnett square, see if you can identify the homozygous traits, where you have two identical alleles, okay, two identical traits. Well, here's one. Here is a homozygous dominant, got two capital G's, and then here is homozygous recessive, okay, two lowercase g's. Okay, so if the two alleles are the same, the two different parts of the trait are the same, it is said to be homozygous. The opposite is heterozygous. Heterozygous. Hetero means different. Okay, so here I have two different alleles for a trait. Okay, capital A, lowercase a. Now, yes, they're both A's. I do understand this, and this often causes a lot of confusion. Yes, they are both the same letter. However, they are different because they're not both capitals or they're not both lowercase. One is capital, one is lowercase. So even though they are the same letter, it's actually represented two different traits. Okay, so looking at our Punnett square again right here, see if you can identify all of the heterozygous traits. Well, I've got quite a few. I've got, here is a heterozygous trait, okay, capital and lowercase. Here's another heterozygous trait, capital and lowercase. Here's a heterozygous trait, and here is a heterozygous trait. Okay, so most of the traits in this particular Punnett square are heterozygous. Okay, so hetero means different, whereas, okay, homo means the same. You'll learn more about this when you get into chemistry. You're talking about homogeneous mixtures. Homogeneous mixtures are mixtures that are the same throughout the mixture. And then heterogeneous mixtures. Heterogeneous mixtures are mixtures that are different throughout the mixture. So you see these root words, homo and hetero, quite often when we're talking about science. Okay. Now, if an organism carries both alleles that are the same, okay, the genetic code that is passed on by both parents is the same. This is an example of a homozygous trait. We've got the capital A, okay? That is a homozygous trait. Both letters, yes, they are both A's, but they're also both capitals. That's what we're really focusing in on. Capital A, capital A. I've got a picture of a Labrador, a black lab. I have a black lab dog, and a lot of times we refer to dogs as being purebred. So if the mom was a black lab and the dad was a black lab, then the puppies have no other option than to be black labs. That's a purebred dog. You don't have a black lab mom and a black lab dad and all of a sudden get a poodle. Okay, you don't get a poodle out of that combination. Okay, you're only going to get a black lab puppy. That is a purebred, an example of a purebred organism where you get the same genetic information from mom and dad. Versus a hybrid. Okay, a hybrid means you get two alleles for a trait that are different. Okay, the genetic code that's passed on by each parent is different. So again, different, heterozygous, capital A, lowercase a. Heterozygous, I got a picture of a hybrid dog. Sometimes we might call this dog maybe a mutt or something along those lines. Okay, his mom and dad are two different breeds. Maybe it's a black lab mom and a collie for a dad. Don't know. Okay, but mom and dad, you get two different sets of genetic information, and you're combining those two different sets of genetic information. Get what we call a hybrid. Okay. Now, chromosomes. Chromosome is a thread-like strand that contains DNA and is found in the nucleus of each cell. Humans have 23 unique chromosomes. Okay? 23 unique chromosomes. This is where all of your DNA is stored. DNA is all the genetic information, all the blueprints, all the genetic code that's going to tell the new organism exactly what it's going to be like, it's going to shape like, look like, size, structure, all sorts of things. So all of the genetic information that you get from your parents is contained in these chromosomes. And you also have these chromosomes in you, this genetic information. Now, these chromosomes are found in the nucleus. Where do we find nuclei? Well, we find nucleus, in each one of your cells. So every single one of your cells in your body has these chromosomes in each cell. So every cell in your body is carrying on this DNA. That's how a red blood cell knows to create a new red blood cell, or a skin cell knows how to create a new skin cell because it carries the DNA for that particular cell. Okay, we don't have red blood cells creating brain cells. That's not the way it works. We have red blood cells that make new red blood cells because they contain the DNA for that particular type of cell, the blueprints for that particular type of cell. DNA is found in the chromosomes and transmits genetic information. Here I have a picture of what we call a double helix. We call this a strand of DNA. got billions and trillions of strands of DNA in your chromosomes. Okay, again, it's all the genetic information. Okay, it's kind of like the blueprints for a house. Every last pipe, every last electrical cord, every last piece of wood,